Okay, good afternoon. I would like to call the May 9th, 2024 Measure Review Citizen Oversight Committee meeting to order. I would like to point out this meeting is being hosted through Zoom teleconference for viewing purposes. City Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Committee Member King. Here. Committee Member Clark.
Here.
Committee Member Collins.
Here.
Committee Member Kyrus.
Here.
Committee Member Silva.
Here.
Vice Chair Schaefer. Chairwoman Chanel.
Here.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that Vice Chair Schaefer is absent.
Okay, Committee Member Clark will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, communications from the public. There is a 3-minute per person time limit for all general public comments. All who wish to speak, including committee members and staff, need to be recognized by the chairwoman before speaking. Please state your name and item you're commenting on before speaking. We will take public comment for items listed on the agenda.
Chairwoman, I don't believe we have any public comment.
Okay, so. Hey, we actually, about these that were provided,
we just received and filed.
we just received, okay, received and filed, okay. All right, we'll now move on to our discussion item.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Prestwich. I'm the city manager. And I want to take an opportunity for us, because we have a few new faces around the table, to have everyone introduce themselves. And it may be helpful for us to start with the staff and then just keep wandering around the entire committee. Does that work for everyone? Okay, so we'll go this way.
I'm Deputy City Clerk Elodie Klug.
Good afternoon, Stephen Graham, the attorney.
Good afternoon, Eddie Sell, Fire Chief and Agency Director for Hemet Fire and Life Safety Agency.
Helena Beasley, Principal Accountant.
Hello, Mike Ariano, Police Chief.
City Clerk John Hallmeyer.
Felicia Silva, committee member.
Norm Kyrus, committee member.
Kayla Kane, Committee Member.
Tammy Chenault, Committee Chair.
Dick Clark, Committee Member. Mark Collins, Committee Member.
Okay, we're passing out a number of things. Part of this is related to the fact that we have not yet invested in an 84-inch screen over here, and this is going to be a little hard to follow. But we have a presentation that is going to focus a lot on background today. And this is, we're here 3 weeks before we were with you last year, which gives thankfully more time to talk about the year 22-23, which is what our audit was performed on, that ended June 30th, 2023. We're going to talk to you about expenditures from that time frame, as well as the audit. And then we're also going to talk about current year operations. And we're going to talk to you about what to expect in the second meeting. So let me begin with a background. Measure U was approved as a temporary general sales tax in November of 2016. The intent was to support its intention to expend all proceeds of the transaction use tax toward enhancement of public safety. The implementing guidance came from a resolution. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the distinction between a general tax and a special tax. I'll pause until everyone has one of these.
Does everybody have a PowerPoint?
Yes.
And everybody has an ordinance and a resolution.
We'll eventually get to the ordinance and we'll eventually get to the resolution. In November of 2023, this temporary tax that was set to expire was extended by the voters, and essentially the sunset for this tax was removed. So at the moment, there's no foreseeable end to that tax. It will continue in place. So and that was called Measure H. The ordinance, if you pull out the ordinance, it looks like this. It's going to look just like the reso, so you have to look at the top. And if we drop to page 11 in the ordinance, that's when it speaks to the creation of a citizen oversight committee, which is you. And we're going to spend some time looking at the bottom of the page, which I have on the next slide here. This is the ordinance describes the duties and responsibilities of the commission. And so we're going to read today on this slide. I've highlighted the focus today, and you'll see that we didn't talk about the proposed. That's going to come at your next meeting. We're still developing their budget. We're actively involved in labor discussions with all of our bargaining groups. It's a very dynamic time. So we have been actively working on the budget development over the last several months, and we will have better data for everyone as the efforts at the table and the efforts at refining the budget come together over the next month. But we anticipate scheduling a follow-up meeting with you in about 2 to 3 weeks. So the review of the proposed budget for 24-25 will come at that next meeting. But today, we're going to focus on the annual review, as well as the review of the actual expenditure of proceeds generated by this tax. And number 2, the independent annual audit required by the ordinance. The ordinance also notes that you should meet at least twice each calendar year and more frequently as necessary or if necessary to discharge the responsibilities of the committee. We can meet more than twice, so if the committee would like to meet more based on some of the conversation today, we can continue to have that conversation. We do need to build in about 5 work days before a report that you would present to the city council or would be transmitted to the city council is given to them before they adopt the budget. And let's say the end of the month of June is really the target. So we're anticipating this, the 4th Tuesday of June will be the day they formally approve the budget.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Are we gonna get back to having the minimum 2 a year?
yes, you're going to have 2 this month, right? This month, and whether the next meeting's later this month or early June.
Was there a reason why we didn't? I mean, I'm asking the questions that I've had citizens ask me.
Yeah, I don't know if, I don't know when your last meeting was before I arrived, but I arrived in February of last year. And we had a acting finance director, and so I know that things were turbulent at that time.
So if we, in the future, like I have already done, left messages at your office saying when we're gonna have a meeting, those messages will be returned?
Sure.
They weren't.
Are you talking about a year ago?
No,
Okay.
since you've been
Okay.
here.
Well, I arrived a year ago.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're having a meeting today, and we're having a meeting in 2 to 3 weeks. That's 2 for calendar year 2024.
I don't think that will satisfy the citizens that have contacted me. To the point that I even, just to let it be known, I know there's citizens here in the city that know. I even went to the point of contacting the AG's office in Sacramento to see if any of us had any kind of liability without the meetings being held as the ordinance says. I haven't heard back from them. I'm waiting for that written opinion.
Okay. So for 2024, we're planning 2 meetings today. Today is meeting 1. Second meeting would come in 2 to 3 weeks.
I would expect that we should probably do more than that. To read the listing of, that we got, and where's JP? Thank you for putting that out. I was the one that asked him to get us some info. You know, to read 300-400 pages in a couple days was difficult. And I would suggest, if we're planning those meetings, that we do them as those are quarterly probably, or at least the PBS that we can look at. When they come up, open to the citizens, that we can have a meeting.
Are you,
Also.
are you referring to the expenditures that we're now posting quarterly?
Yes, the line item.
Okay. We can talk more about that.
Okay.
I think a lot of what, you're anticipating will be covered in our discussion today. It's a broader discussion than we had last year. And last year's discussion frankly raised some issues that we're going to address today. So I hope that's going to be helpful.
Yeah. A lot of the line item things, I don't think we've ever been told more than in a general way. And that was a fight when we were trying to get people to vote yes on age.
Yeah, I think, and frankly, it's one of the reasons that we decided this was an important transparency opportunity for the city. And every transaction from inception has now been posted on the website.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Who is in charge of scheduling the meetings? And before you answer, I want to express the concern that he has. I do express that we probably should be more than probably twice, so we can stay apprised of the situation, but who would be scheduling those meetings?
We'll work through the city manager and the administrative services director in the city clerk's office. So you can work with myself, Tiffany, our acting admin services director, and Sean Paul.
Okay,
But typically we would work with a chair.
right, okay, thank you.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the distinction between a general tax and special tax. In June of 2016, there was a measure, was it measure O, did you say? Measure O, in 2016, it was a dedicated special tax. Special taxes require a 2/3 vote approval of voters. The effort was made in Hemet in 2016 to pass that. And the proceeds would have been restricted exclusively for police and fire. That narrowly failed to pass with over 60% of the vote, but it needed 66.7% plus, right? In order to pass. Specific taxes, special taxes have to be used for a specific purpose, just as this one measure O was proposed to. What the city did was pivot at that time, and in November, on the November ballot, they didn't have a lot of time. So they imagined the elections in June of 2016. By the end of July, in a matter of weeks, the city had decided to transition to a general tax, which was Measure U. And that was placed on the ballot. A general tax can be used for any municipal purpose. The city council can change its mind on how it invests those proceeds at any given time and update a resolution, suspend a resolution. The city attorney can answer more questions if you have questions related to this, to the distinction between a special tax and a general tax. Measure U is a general tax. But in late 2016, before the election, the city council adopted a resolution that said, this is our intent. Our intent is to spend and invest these dollars in the specific way outlined in Resolution 4701. And so, is that the right number? Did I get the right number here?
Great.
4703. And so, and then the tax passed. And shortly after the tax passed, the council adopted Resolution 4731 and attached as an exhibit 4703, right? That said, we remain committed to investing the proceeds the way as it's described. And since that point in time, that has been the case, with the exception of the 1.2, which we'll talk about in a moment. Are there any questions about the distinction between a special and a general tax? Okay. This is a slide you didn't see last year, but I think it tells the story of Hemet, and it's a very important slide. It's probably easier to read on the handout PowerPoint, but imagine the world in 2016. What you see here on the left side is a city in decline. Revenues were not exceeding expenditures, and as a result, the city's general fund reserve balance was dropping. And by 2016, it had almost bottomed out. It did bottom out in 2017. The voters passed that measure in November of 16. And you can see here reflected in blue, the revenue began flowing in early 2017 and then has continued ever since. It's been an enormous part of the city's comeback financially. So we were on the state's naughty list. We were removed in late 22 from that. I think it was a state auditor, right? And we've had enormous financial success since then. We just closed June 30th, 2023. That's the audit you'll see next year. We closed with a $62 million surplus. So incredible, an incredible comeback from this community. What that's done is it's allowed the city to invest in ways that it really wasn't able to in prior years. This is the first time we've been able to deploy in the current budget some strategic investments, whether it's roads, whether it's targeted efforts at helping our business community with a vandalism relief program, putting money toward trash enclosures, which should deter homelessness and other things like that. We've also purchased some specialty equipment for police and fire as well. So the positive trend of the budget, you'll see that we believe that there's a clear linkage between the passage of that measure, Measure U, and the impact that it's having on particularly our police department and providing equipment for both police and fire. We'll come back to that. Now I want you to pull out this resolution. We're going to talk about, this is part of the review today. I'm going to have a partner in my presentation with Tiffany. Tiffany is going to run through some of the numbers. But if you turn to page 3 of the attached exhibit, so this is kind of near the end of this package. There are items 1 through 7 under the therefore clause. So we're going to be reviewing resolution 4731, which uses 4703 as the exhibit. And we're going to go in more depth this year than we did last year because there were a couple of provisions that weren't discussed, and I think it's important to discuss those. So number 1 here, these are just a reference to the recitals, number 1. Number 2 and this is where the implementing resolution has guidance on how the proceeds should be invested. So number 2 here reads that the city council shall dedicate 100% of the tax proceeds to enhancing public safety services within the city and increasing funding for services provided in the resolution. So I note on our attachment, I should move the slide ahead here. Number 1 here number 2 on this list here is just a reference that ties to the actual resolution. Is dedication of 100% of the tax to enhancing public safety. Number 3 here, the annual review of an expenditure plan. That's what's going to come at your next meeting. So we're going to have some recommendations on investments for Measure U for both police and fire. 2/3 of those will be police, 1/3 of those will be fire, the way that breaks down. So that annual review will occur at your next meeting. We combined those in the prior year meeting, given the time. Number 4 here, tax proceeds. So now if you jump to the next page, that guidance for number 3 is very broad. What we showed you last year was the actual language and all the permissible ways that police and fire expenditures are compliant under this. So it's a very comprehensive list. It's important to read through 3A because that explains the flexibility of how police and fire can use those resources. Number 4, each fiscal year, the tax proceeds shall be allocated 2/3 to the city police department and 1/3 to the fire department. Number 5, this was not discussed last year, but I think it's important. When the voters pass this tax, what we don't want to see is a situation where the tax proceeds supplant investments that existed before, right? So before, and included in the resolution is an awareness and a recognition that the city council was investing 72% of its original non-Measure U, before Measure U arrived, 72% of the city's dollars were being invested in police and fire. And what this calls for is a maintenance of those investments, and we've continued to do that each year. So that's a maintenance of effort is another way of referring to that. Are there any questions about the maintenance of effort?
Is that happening?
That is happening.
Great.
Yes. And we'll see an illustration of how that happens because Measure U proceeds are about $16 million today. It represents about 25% of our available revenue. So if you take the 72% from the original pot and you add the extra Measure U on top, that extra 25% of revenue, 79% of our available revenue is being invested in police and fire. 2/3 police, 1/3 fire at the budget. The actuals change based on some circumstances. And that means that we operate City Hall, the library, public works, all the functions that are not public safety with 21% of the available dollars. So it's fairly lean on the non-safety side.
The former police chief allocated on, I think, a whim, that the homeless was now going to be part of Measure U. Is that part of that 72%?
It's part of, right now in the current year budget, measure the city net contract, which is about 1.2 million. That's being funded out of Measure U, and that was reviewed with the committee.
It is being funded out of Measure U?
Yes.
And it's not safety.
It is, I think the police chief, and we could talk to the police chief about how that helps their operational activities.
Well, I'm sure it does, but it's not safety.
I think it depends on how you read the language, and I don't know if the city attorney wants to comment on the broad nature of the definition.
Absolutely. So you have to look at the exact expenditures, how they're being used. There is a lot of flexibility in 3A, including support for city personnel that supports police and fire services, not just police officers themselves. But I think that rather than giving you just a legalistic kind of definition, if that's my job, I think the question would be when we have significant public safety incidents with homeless, who do we call to address those issues? Call the police department, and we call the fire department. And so they are literally the frontline people at the city who deal with those issues on a daily basis. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that a portion of our homeless action plan here is dependent on police and fire action. It can be supported with Measure U.
I agree with everything you just said, except it's not safety.
I respectfully disagree. I think that 3A is extremely broad in the categories that can be supported. You know, for example, police wages and salaries can be supported. So police officers who are assigned to homeless detail, it says city personnel that support the police. We oftentimes will have other individuals. I think we have the mental health team and others who go with police. So I think that there's a lot of flexibility there. I don't think that a rigid understanding of this can only fund salaries of police officers who are doing other things. I don't know if that works.
So putting people in hotel rooms is no safety.
I believe we used ARPA for a lot of those. But again, I think that you have a list, a comprehensive list of every Measure U expenditure that has been incurred by the city since the tax was passed. If we want to look at a specific one and the committee would like an opinion as to whether that's in compliance with this resolution, we'd be happy to do it.
Thank you.
Quick question, because I know, excuse me, last year, that mental health team was in jeopardy of not still being a part of the team. So with the Measure U funds, we were able to fund that and it's still going. Is that correct?
I'd have to look at my list. I'm not sure and if it was in jeopardy, it was because of staffing on their behalf. They were really short in staffing for clinicians. So that's why we were in jeopardy at that point.
Okay, I just thought that was pretty necessary that we still have, so I just wanted to.
Absolutely, and we're planning on putting a second team out there as soon as we get our staff. And that's on the police side, as soon as we get the staff.
Okay, let's talk about number 6 now. Did we get to let's talk 5 real quick. The 72%, that's what was here in number 5. I mentioned that this wasn't discussed last year, but I want to make sure that everyone understands the maintenance of effort. We don't want to use the tax proceeds to essentially fund things that were obligations of the general fund before the tax arrived. Now, number 6, this is something that wasn't discussed by the staff last year, but did come up in subsequent conversations with the city council. And I think it's important that we acknowledge it and talk about it in relatively great detail today, because I want to spend some time on it, and I think it's appropriate. So number 6 reads that essentially that the city will attain a funded staffing ratio. This is for the police department of 1.2 full-time equivalent sworn peace officers per 1,000. Today, in 2023-24, in the current year budget, we added 8 police officers in this budget. And with a population of approaching 90,000, we have 90 sworn officers. We have a ratio of 1.0 to 1,000. For context, just so we're clear, I think it was the city of Temecula, but I was at a realtors event in Temecula. Were you at that event?
Yeah.
And one of the city managers, I think it was the city of Temecula city manager, was essentially touting the fact that they had attained a ratio of 1.0 officers per 1,000 in that presentation. And I put a mental note in my head to make sure we mention that down the road. But it's certainly, it's not a ratio. This 1.2 is not a ratio. It's my understanding. Did we get a handout on that?
I did not, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
So we have a summary. Why don't we send that to the committee after? So you see what the ratio has been each of the 7 years since inception, because we have never been able to attain that ratio. I want to talk to you about some of the reasons that probably influence that. At the end of the day, it's about dollars, but we want to talk in greater detail about why the city has not been able to attain that level. Obviously, other dollars have been invested in buildings and equipment and assets, some of which were very old by the time this measure passed. I think it's fair to say our salaries were probably not competitive in 2016 when the city was running out of money and salaries had to become more competitive. So things are, as people were paid more, becomes more expensive. But we're going to spend the next, let me just focus on, we'll come back to that in just a second. I'm going the wrong direction on that. Okay, so our focus today, as I mentioned, is to review the 22-23 expenditures, and we're going to give you some information and send you more additional information between today and the next meeting. And we're going to talk to you about some trends happening in 23-24 with our budget. Tiffany's also going to talk about the independent financial audit. And then we want to talk to you about some of these transparency measures that we talked about that we implemented this past year. So, and this is, when you hear comments and you have concerns, for example, about the city net contract and the vouchers, these are issues that you can note and include in the future correspondence that you'll be sending to the city council. So if you have concerns, whether they're majority concerns or minority concerns, I would encourage you to share those concerns in a written way as part of your transmitted report to the city council so they can consider your feedback as they consider the adoption of the budget. So this next item is for us to drill down into number 6 a little bit here. So while all the other terms within these resolutions appear to have been achieved since inception, the city has clearly had difficulties reaching and maintaining the level of sworn officer, that sworn ratio of 1.2 per 1,000 residents. In the current year budget, we've budgeted approximately one sworn officer per 1,000. We also did add some, in addition to the 8 officers we added in the current year budget, I believe we added an additional 4 non-sworn.
Non-sworn, probably a community service officer, okay.
But that results in a deficit. So if we did the math based on the current cost of a police officer, what's the delta between 1.0 and 1.2? The math is it would require about an extra 3.3 today for us to get to that level. So whether that comes through Measure U or whether it comes through the general fund, the money has to come from somewhere. And in both the general fund, non-Measure U general fund, as well as the Measure U monies, we appropriate money to the police and fire departments on a 2/3, 1/3 ratio. So if it doesn't come from Measure U or the general fund, I mean, if it comes from the general fund, it would have to come at the expense of all of the other departments of the city. And recognize that this is the number for the police department, so a third of that, that would represent 2/3 of some number, so closer to $4.5 million. Ballpark would be extra money needed.
Did you not say that
Unless-
we had a $54 million surplus?
This is for operations, so when we fund staff members, we have to balance. And if we don't balance, we will run out of money. And it accelerates each year if we, for example, budgeted 4 million or 5 million, let's say $5 million extra. If year two revenue doesn't grow by at least $5 million, we start to cascade down and we run out of money. So what we do from a budgeting standpoint for staffing is we always want to balance. Now, some of the monies that are being invested are clearly being invested in equipment. We mentioned in another slide, we'll come to it, that it takes about $100,000 to equip a vehicle. And just the vehicle alone that comes with all those new officers. So we hired 8 officers last year. They all need a vehicle. We have a procedure and a policy in place here where our officers take their vehicle home. So that vehicle is not being used 24/7. It's resting in a garage. It's able to be deployed. That officer that's called in can go straight to scene. But that's a policy that we have. But I wanted to show you the math on what it would take to get to 1.2 officers, and you can recommend that we get there in different ways, right? We don't want to overestimate our revenue because we don't want to set ourselves up for deficit spending later. I think the best thing the city can do is grow its economy. Because as we grow our economy, we will have more dollars for police, fire, and the rest of City Hall. But the challenge is, we would have to pull back on equipment investments and some of the technology that's frankly becoming, I think I call it a force multiplier. I think others call it there's another term for multiplier that I've heard. Chief Post, I think, had a different name for it. But it's a force, these cameras, we're gonna talk to you about some of the investments we've made, but they're incredible. And we started July 1 last year with 40 cameras. Today, we're going to have about 100. And are they already in? They're close.
They're close. Yeah, they're putting them up there currently.
We're in the process of getting to 100 in the current year.
But doesn't the resolution say you will have it, not that you will try to have it?
It does, George. It does. And that's why I think it's important that we talk about it, that you write about it, and you share your perspective on it. But I want to share some additional information.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. So next slide, we'll jump ahead. So here are some changes that occurred that in some ways were definitely unforeseeable. But it's important that we talk about these because this has an impact on and has had an impact on the city's ability to provide services. And I think strain itself with this 1.2, feel the strain to that 1.2 ratio. There's a little noise out there. Maybe we can, I know we need to leave the door.
We gotta use this room.
So number one, we're going to talk a little today about the CalPERS discount rate. This is I don't want them to close the door. So we'll open it up in just a second. We just want to make sure everyone knows we have a public meeting. So the CalPERS discount rate, we'll talk a little bit about what this is, but this is the investment return that CalPERS that supports our pensions, our public agency pensions. Some of you know this pretty well. They need to hit 6.8% on their investments every year today. Used to be a different number 7 years ago. In fact, it's changed many times since this ballot measure was adopted. And every time it's reduced, it requires the city to spend more money to keep PERS and their pension fund solvent. Additionally, CalPERS investment performance hasn't been that great. There was a good year a couple of years ago, 21%, but they had a process in place that they just eliminated about 2.5 to 3 weeks ago, where there was an automatic trigger. If you hit a certain level of investment, the discount rate was going to drop to protect CalPERS and their investments and essentially spread that burden to all of their member agencies. And so it recently dropped from 7 to 6.8% a couple of years ago when that 21.3% year of performance came in. We were grateful that they hit 21%, but it had an impact on us and it cost us more money. We also have some concerns. I wasn't here in 2016. A lot of us weren't here. But we have some concerns that the number, it's possible that the salaries of our officers at that time were not at market rate. We're in the middle of negotiations right now. We've done some comp and class surveys. We know our officers are paid well, but we also know that they're not at market today. And the market continues to change. It's going to cost us more money in July, right, than it does for an officer today, because we want to maintain a competitive salary. We want to retain and we want to recruit officers as well as other staff. So there is a concern that perhaps in 2016, the forecasting may not have been as accurate as it could have been. They also remember we're putting this together pretty quickly, so I don't know how much time they had to do that. Also, I mentioned the equipment. It's not cheap. It comes with each office. Next slide.
Quick question on the CalPERS.
Yes.
Of course, I was in the PERS system for more than a while, but weren't there years when CalPERS was doing good that the entities, cities and counties didn't have to pay in?
I love this question because it gives me a chance to tell a story that's an important story.
I can remember our fight up north was, we kept telling the county, save that money, put it off to the side, don't spend it, because you're gonna need it eventually, and of course they didn't.
Yeah. So in the early 90s, the state was in deep recession. Remember base closures, job retraining. The state was losing money, tens of millions of dollars, and what they did at the time was they looked to local governments as their piggy bank, cities and counties and special districts, but particularly cities and counties. And there was something called the Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund, this is ERAF, and property tax was shifted from cities and counties to schools to keep schools solvent, which is good for schools, right? However, at the time, finance directors, city managers, mayors, and council members were clamoring for the state to return those dollars back to local governments, back to the cities and the counties that they took those dollars from, and restore that funding. But remember, by the late 90s, by 96, by 97, really, by 97, 98, we were entering the period of the dot-com. Irrational exuberance became a term of art that the Fed chair, Alan Greenspan, used. And CalPERS had enormous returns. They were averaging somewhere in the 30+% return on a single year. And they earned so much money that cities, there became this term called superfunded, where cities had to pay almost nothing on base salary to keep the pension fund solvent because the pension fund was making so much money. And during that era of irrational exuberance and dot-com, before 2000, but before the year 2000, all those city finance directors, those city managers, and those council members and mayors, we forgot about our fight, and we sort of never came back to the fact that some money was actually moved permanently, and we were left behind. I think a clever grad student could look at any city, do a case study, and probably come to the conclusion that a city like Hemet probably has lost cumulatively since the mid-90s about 100 million, at least $10 million, but let's say it's possible that it could be $50 to $100 million. Those are dollars that could have been invested in streets and maintenance and other investments, whether it was services or infrastructure. But it's too bad that memory faded. I haven't forgotten about it. So when we talk about it every once in a while, I like to share that story. But you're right. At the time, the investments were so good, it led to something called retirement enhancement. And so both for public safety as well as miscellaneous, so safety and non-safety members of public agencies, our pension benefits were enriched. So on the public safety side, the formula typically was 2.0 at 50, and it went up to 3.0 at 50. That's a 50% increase, right? One increase over two. 50% increase, often retroactive to the date of hire. So if you'd been a police officer for 29 years, in 1999, when your city council decided to enact this benefit, it's possible that the council's action gave you a 50% increase in your retirement. Just incredible. On the non-safety side, it was more like about a third. So imagine a scenario where a city was 2 at 55, that's the formula, 2% at 55. And it grew to 2.7 at 55. That's about a third, 33% increase, 0.7 divided by 2.0. And that was again retroactive to the date of hire. I sat in the closed session of another city during one of those conversations, and the conversation took about 5 to 10 minutes to make that decision. It went swiftly. The question was asked, how much would that cost annually? And the answer was about 300,000. But I worked in a city that had a need to spend probably another $1.5 million a year on its streets to keep the streets as they were today, as opposed to in decline. Those decisions were costly. And when CalPERS experienced the Great Recession and about a 40% market loss in the late 2000s, it led to pension reform, which we call PEPRA today. So it affects the pension benefits for employees from 2014 forward have been reduced. They're reduced lower than they were before those pensions were increased in the 1999-2000 era. And it's helping pull down costs, but I will tell you, we are in the bubble right now of the most expensive employees. We'll see a little bit of that today and talk a little bit more about it, but that's a really important question.
And there were two things that CalPERS lost. You said with the investment reduction, but the state also came in and basically stole a huge amount of money and never repaid PERS neither.
Correct.
Which affected down the road, they spread it out on the cities and counties.
Right. And Hemet lost a large employer, EMWD, at about the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine all those pension dollars that wandered over to nearby cities closer to their new headquarters. I think that's probably had, millions and millions of dollars of impact in our local economy. So here's a list of how the discount rate, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. This is the rate of return that CalPERS needs to make. They have, back in 2016, they needed to make 7.5% on their investments, or the portfolio lost money. So if they did better than 7.5, that's great. If they did less than 7, they made 7% on their money. It actually hurt the fund because the fund needed 7.5 or more. And then it was because CalPERS felt the investment risk, they were also underfunded as a result of this significant market loss of about 40%. They needed to find ways to become better funded. And so one of their strategies was to deploy some of that risk and responsibility to the public agencies. And so what we see here is a gradual reduction, and cities and counties screamed about these reductions. Some were more painful than others, right? The dip between 7.25 and 7% was 25 basis points. I remember a city, I had a colleague who was testifying in front of the state legislature about 12.5 basis points, which I didn't think was that bad. Our city was of the opinion that it was bad, but the discount rate has dropped over the past 7 years, and I wanted to show you what that is. It's currently at 6.8%. A couple of years ago, there was a lot of chatter about seeing that discount rate drop to 6.0 down the road. It would be done incrementally, just as it was done here. I think the jury's still out on whether that's going to occur. It probably depends on their success in the market. We'll talk about what their returns look like on the next page, the next 2 pages. So here's their performance. This is actually their performance and the impact on our CalPERS numbers. So when we have a police officer or a firefighter, let's say that they're paid $100,000 in 2014. We would have to pay an extra 42% to CalPERS to keep CalPERS solvent in 2014. At the time of the vote, that number had grown to 49.87%. So on top of that $100,000 salary, $49,000 would be required for each firefighter, police officer. But you can see that those numbers have been incrementally growing. There was a little blip in 2019. It came back down a little bit and then has somewhat stabilized, but still incrementally growing. And now the number is 62.9%. And you can see that illustrated on the chart here. We've also translated that into dollars for you to understand and see the impact of those changes. So back in 2017, that was about $6 million annually that was required out of our coffers to keep the pension solvent. Today, that number is $10 million. So we've seen about a $4 million increase in just the last 7 years. That's roughly equivalent to that delta between 1.0 and 1.2.
Is that where when I first started, my check didn't have any withdrawals toward PERF. The city paid the whole thing, but a lot of the contracts now, there's a 7% or something like that. Is that where some of that's coming from?
Right, what committee member Clark is talking about is that during the last, let's say, it was probably a practice as early as the mid-2000s, if not a little earlier. So cities are in competition for talent, right? And one of the strategies that cities and counties deployed in the early 2000s and probably for quite a while after that until it became I think it became a no-no at 2014 with the pension reform, was cities would, or counties would often pick up the employee share of the CalPERS. So each formula has a different number associated with it, but let's say it's about 8% on average. So while the city is paying 49 to 62%, the employee is picking up about 8% on their own. That's their obligation. PEPRA, the new model, has different formulas. Classic, meaning public safety, well, people in public safety before, well, public safety and miscellaneous, public safety and non-safety. Before 2014 were called classic. I'm a classic. Anyone hired after 2014 or had a separation of service of more than 6 months becomes a PEPRA employee. There are different numbers and they range from about 5 or 6% up to about 9 to 12, right? You can negotiate additional contributions today, but typically every agency today requires that and does not pay for it, the employee, as it may have done prior to 2014. However, when that was switched, a lot of agencies, including some that I worked for, would see an equivalent pay raise that was similar to the amount that used to be picked up. And so in some ways, it probably became a wash in many agencies for employees, but it was a new obligation of the employees, a restored obligation of the employees. I know it's a lot of detail. If you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to try to answer those. Okay. Any questions about this or the chart? Go to the next page. This is a look at the CalPERS investment performance. We can show you a chart for this too. I can send you a chart. This is just the numbers. But in 2017-18, you go back to that last slide on what that discount rate was back in 2017-18. 8.6 exceeded the discount rate, right? So that was a good year. They didn't make a lot on their investments above the necessary minimum, but it was a positive year. Even though they made money in 2018 and 19 and 19-20, the fund lost money. And we show that in red. In 2020, 2021, that's the 21.3% that I mentioned earlier. And what that did is it automatically triggered the reduction in the discount rate from 7.0 to 6.8. And while it was a good year and our costs actually went down materially, and we can point you to, if any of you would like an appointment with finance to kind of talk through the audit report, we can do that because there's some monumental swings.
But what does this have to do with Measure U?
I'm going to talk to you about.
Okay, fine, thank you.
It has to do with the cost has gone up for every individual employee. And so the employees cost more.
Okay.
But the five, let me get back to this. Was
2021,
yeah,
21%.
I don't know what I was going to mention. The last 2 years, 22, they lost 7.4%, but that's really 7.4 plus 6.8, right? 6.8 is the discount rate. They actually were underwater about 14%. Terrible year. It sort of offset the prior year. And then we owned the responsibility for an extra 0.2% on the CalPERS rate. So if you look at our audit, which is part of your responsibility, this is the tie. You see incredible swings in the OPEB numbers, our future obligations, our forecasted debt. It's, it's I think $30 million. It's in the 30 million.
Yeah, I don't know offhand.
It's north of 20 million, I think. But you saw it come down after the 21%, and then that next year it went back up. And that's what I think we see in this audit right here is the bounce back because the performance was dismal in 22. 22, 23, the year we just ended, they hit 5.8%. They were up a little bit. Would have been happy to see them earn a lot more. I think some of your own portfolios probably did better than 5.8% in 22, 23. I'm sorry, if that was the case. Okay, at this time, let me turn it over, unless there are any questions on the performance.
Just a quick one, because I'm really not understanding why 7.4 is in red, the 21, 22. I heard you do math, but it seems like it was supposed to be at 6.8, but that's at 7.4.
So what they did is they lost 7.4%. So this was.
It's in parentheses, so.
So it's in parentheses
Got it.
because it was below zero, but
Okay,
they had to hit something above zero, right? They're programmed to hit at least 6.8%. So what we need to do is take the 7.4 below zero and add another 6.8 on top of it. So a cumulative
Got it.
14. And it was a bad year, unfortunately, for CalPERS. We're all betting on great years for CalPERS. It's in all of our best interests that CalPERS does well. So we're going to talk about high level numbers for 22, 23. We'll turn it over to Tiffany to share some of that.
Yeah, hello, everybody.
hello.
I just wanted to go over that we did file our ACFR for 22, 23, and it should have been an attachment on the staff report that you received. So you do have that information. There is a lot of detail that's in there. Like if you wanted some staffing ratios, like Mark was talking about, that is in our statistical section, which is towards the back of that report. And it gives 10 years worth of that data. So you can see how we've grown into the ratio that we have, even though it still isn't where we would like it to be. Within that audit, we did end the year in a very good position and we did grow our fund balance. And I just want to make sure and to clarify that when we go into our budget year, we can only budget what our revenues are. So even though there's money sitting in a reserve, we can't use that for ongoing expenses. If we do that, we'll back up where we were, 7, 8 years ago, and then back on the auditor's watch list. So we can only budget what revenues are coming in and what we're projecting. Anything above and beyond that can only be like a use of one-time fund balance. So when we get into personnel is very expensive, and trying to meet those ratios, we just don't have the capacity because the revenues are not driving it to allow us that. But having said that, this next slide is a snapshot for Measure U. So you can see where we've started the fund balance in Measure U as of June 30th. Oh, this starting at 7/1/22 is where we began this fund balance. The revenues that we received, these are the actuals, and we do split them up between police and fire, so you can see the difference. And then our expenditures for salary and fringe benefits, which would have been to the fully burdened rate of the personnel that are being charged to Measure U, are split here between police and fire. The operating supplies and services would be anything along the lines of like office supplies, professional services, leases for your copy machine, anything along those lines that cost to support and support the work staff. Internal service charges are those that everybody pays into to fund like the overhead of the fleet maintenance in facilities, in general fund overhead. So internal services are just part of life, and we can't get around them in local government. So it is a sore spot with a lot of people, but it is something that is necessary to maintain the operations of the entire city. The capital outlay would be anything along the lines of vehicles or anything that is usually above a $10,000 threshold that we can depreciate over time. That could be the drone cameras, depending on their individual pricing, and any kind of vehicle, the fire engines, the fire trucks. And then we come to the end of our expenditures, and then you subtract your revenues, your expenditures from your revenues, and that gives you the change in fund balance. So you can see that police had a change of 1.2 million, almost 1.3, and then fire had almost a deficit of 1.8. And then we break it down to what's non-spendable, and non-spendable would be anything that's already earmarked for capital purchases. And the bulk share of that is the fire engines that we do have that are coming, but they're not yet completed. And then we portion out 20% of their reserve, and then the rest is committed, but it's available for spending. So, and then the ending fund balance is at the bottom there. So this is for 22-23, and that's what's been audited in the independent audit that we received. With that audit also, we did have one finding I did want to mention, and that was for, it is a repeat finding from the prior year, and that was for adjustments that were made. Mainly they were some adjustments on our liability insurance that we had to go back and adjust from what the auditor stated it to be. And then there are a couple of invoices that did not get caught that we paid in current year. They should have been included into prior year. So we're working in implementing new processes and procedures in that. And at the same time, our staffing level is a little wonky right now because we don't have a director. We did have somebody out on medical leave. So there was really only like 2 professional staff that could monitor all of this, what was going on. So we are doing our best efforts to make sure that we avoid that because nobody wants a finding. So anyway, on to the next page. This is, yeah,
I got a question before you do that.
sure.
Based on what the fire department actually spent, the allocation is not 66-33, it's 60-40.
Right, the expenditures, we budget the 2/3, 1/3. But when it comes down to the expenditures, those can vary based on various elements. Then that could be, staffing, overtime, it could be additional purchases. So, and there's salary savings in some of that too, where the police department isn't able to fund all of their positions. They can't hire the people to get into the spots for us to pay. So that's where you'll see the fluctuation in expenditures. So, but the budget itself is always budgeted 2/3, 1/3 split. But whether or not they spend it all, that's a different story.
So George is pointing out that the budget didn't, the reality, the actuals were different than the budget, right?
Right, and you're in violation of the resolution.
I think we're always going to be off by at least a penny, most likely.
Right.
And I don't know if the city attorney wants to comment on the scale of that, but
Can I clarify? It's still 2/3, 1/3 because fire may have overspent, but that overspending came from their portion of fund balance of their 1/3. None of that overspending came from police's 2/3 of the balance.
So, section 4 requires that the tax proceeds be allocated on a 2-to-1 basis. And they are every year, as you see with the budgeted amount. If a department does not spend all of the money that was allocated to them, it goes into a fund balance for that department for Measure U. So when you're looking at the fund carryover balance for the police department at 14.9, that is Measure U funds that have been allocated to the police department, but they have been unable to spend for whatever reason, couldn't fill the positions, et cetera. Same thing for the fire department. Fire department had $6.2 million. that had been allocated to them on a 2-to-1 basis. Sorry, they had 6.2 that was there that they had not spent. They spent more in this particular fiscal year, so that fund balance dropped. But when we're looking at number 4 of the resolution, it's how it's allocated by the city council on a 2-to-1 basis. Again, I can tell that the vice chair has a lot of questions about how these things have been done in the past. And I concur with the city manager that I think a healthy thing for the committee to do is if you do have questions about that, you report to the city council on what your recommendations are and what your opinion is. If you think that they should be doing it based on actuals as opposed to budgeted amounts, I don't know how that would actually work. Because like the city manager said, we're always going to be off by a penny at the end of the day. But if that was something that you had a concern with, I would say raise it.
It's not a penny.
I think, I'd like to comment a little bit on that, George, because you raised an important question, which is, well, what happens if, just because the budget is one thing and then the expenditures turn out vastly different, right? And this is not a small number, you're right, $1.8 million is a lot of money. And I think in some cases, let me ask an accounting question, if we hypothetically we had 3 fires that we sent apparatus to for 5 weeks total, that would show up as an expenditure here, right? And we probably did send apparatus out of the region, but we get reimbursed and you don't see that under the expenditure line, you see it somewhere else. Where would we accrue the revenue?
It would be accrued in, it would be in Measure U if they were Measure U or general fund. And usually that's in arrears too. We don't get that revenue right away. It takes a while to go through the state process.
So one potential scenario is something like that, right? And we've had a lot of statewide fires and I encourage and I want our firefighters to help others because we need their help when it's time for us and we have a fire. We also learn from those experiences and we get reimbursed for that. We sent some people, you probably read, we sent rescuers to Hawaii. Right, after the fire in Lahaina, search and rescue operations. But it's also important for our departments to manage the resources that they've been allocated, right? So that's part of my job, part of our department staff and leadership to make sure that we work within the dollars that are provided. And that's one of the reasons that late in 23, we adjusted service levels and turned off an extra what we call a squad at Station 1. We're going to talk a little bit about the volume in Fire Station 1 so you understand the significance of what that means. But what it does is it puts a tremendous burden on the staff that have to take about 15 calls a day at that one station. And for about a 4-week period, they experienced a high level of calls because we turned off something that was being funded entirely on overtime in order to try to keep that number below 2 million, right? Because it was headed for north of $2 million. And I don't know how much money, I don't know that we ever calculated the exact dollar of how much we saved, but it was a shared sacrifice in trying to contain those numbers.
The other question is, where's the city net money in this thing?
It would be in the expenditure line item for police.
It would be what?
In the expenditure, the expenditure line item for police.
But that wouldn't show up in the fiscal year ended 23, right? That was funded separately.
Yeah,
So if you see that in next year's, it would be included in the June 30th, 2024 numbers. This is the June 30th, 2023 numbers.
The city net's been around for quite a while.
they were funded by ARPA, the prior year.
Ah, I understand. Thank you.
So to ensure that I have a full understanding, so I know that the Measure U funds, 2/3 are police and then 1/3 is the fire. And it looks like right here, they got 6.2 million, but we went over because we spent 1.7. So there's a deficit of the 1.7 million, right? So where is that money coming from? How?
So fire started with 6.2 million at the beginning of the year in their bank account. We spent 7 that year. But we had revenue of 5, right? 5.3 million.
Okay.
Plus, we spent 7, so we actually spent 1.797712 more than the revenue. And if you take that 6.2 minus the Plus the revenue of 5.3 minus the 7.1, you get 4.4 at the bottom. So the net is the general, the bank
Got it.
account dropped to 4.4.
Got it. So that was what was budgeted, but we went over that, but we have
Right.
this, got it.
Right.
All right.
6.2 is lost about $1.8 million and it went down to 4.4 million.
So anything that goes over is actually pulling from the fund balance.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, and then on the next page, we do have the current year general fund allocation methodology, which shows you how we do separate everything into the 72 percentage towards public safety for general fund revenue. And then we portion out Measure U separately as well, 2/3, 1/3. So this is a methodology that I've been here for a few years. And I know this is something that we live by, and can be very challenging at times, but we always make sure that we are splitting it 72% and then the 2/3, 1/3 split. That is something that I can attest to, that has always been done. You'll see if you add it up, that what public safety is getting over non-public safety is actually ends up to be 79% of all general fund revenue. So that's what we have to budget with. So that is what we can use for expenditures. Anything above and beyond that, we just can't do unless we have that revenue. So any questions on this one? And this is how we went into the year, this current year. We have made some amendments, they're different, but this is just a snapshot of how we started. Okay, on the next slide, this is a current, where we're currently at and what we're projected to end with. Right now, we did start the fund balance with the 19.3 million, which you can see on the prior year. And then the revenues that we're estimating, this is an estimated amount. We initially did start higher and we reduced it, but now we're expecting a little bit more to come back. So 16.1 in revenues split between police and fire. And then the expenditures, this is what we have in the books right now. Not all of it has been expended, and it may not be at the end of the year, but we're taking it on as we're going to receive all of these funds and we're going to expend all of these funds. So that brings us to the total expenditure line of the 24 million. And then the estimated fund balance lets you know it's the difference between the expenditures from revenues. And then the fund balance breakdown is what is left over. And we carve out the 20% for the reserve requirement, and then the rest is available to spend. So, and you'll see right now that, fire is at 6.7, but fire is in jeopardy of going below their allocation. So, any questions on that?
Yeah, we're gonna jump ahead to what's happening. I should have changed some of these slides, so just a second. Just let anyone that's watching take a look at what was just discussed. This is the 72% allocation and the Measure U allocation. And then we talked about 23, 24. Okay, we're going to talk about what's happening in the police department. The police chief is here available to answer any questions you have after I move through this, but we're going to take a look at property crime. And on the next slide, violent crime. This is FBI data. When I make rounds with service clubs in town, this is an important document and chart to share. We've just updated it for some data from 2023. If you look at Hemet in green, and you note the other two, blue for California, yellow for the United States. The California United States numbers trend pretty close to each other, but Hemet was substantially above those numbers, right? And by 2016, really probably 15, I think the police chief at the time was raising an alarm bell and announcing that the city has to do something to confront this challenge. And we had a bad year in 2015. It was a tough year. This is property crime. We'll look at the violent crime too. By mid 2016, you already had a ballot measure on the ballot. That means by February or so of 16, the community had already come together and said, we're ready to take some action and vote some extra resources in to address this. And as we know, by late 2016, the ballot measure was approved. The revenue started flowing about April of 2017, and the city began to hire, buy more equipment, invest in resources and people. And what we've seen and experienced since is a reduction to the point where a steady decline in property crime. And now you can see by about 2020, halfway through 2020, I guess between 2020 and 2021, we dipped below the state average. And we're basically at or below the national average. I think the police chief would tell us that he's confident that we're going to dip below both averages, the state and national average here, either this year or next year. We're really pleased with the trend line. Do you have a question?
No, I crap.
Chief, anything else you want to say on property crimes?
No, I do believe we will get below for sure. Absolutely, continuing to drop, and especially with all these cameras and whatnot going in, the guys are already on a tangent watching those cameras and getting people in custody, and we will soon start putting those numbers out as well. And that's all the cameras with the organized retail theft. So you'll start seeing those coming out in the next couple months.
Credit to the department, because that $2.5 million grant he just talked about with organized retail theft was a grant with how much match?
Zero.
So none of our money, all of the state's money. We had one of the largest awards in California. Not every city got money. We have 4 live television cameras now sprinkled around town. We've already had a really interesting success story where we followed someone to a hotel who sold some goods to another hotel and got arrested. And it's fantastic. We want that story to get out. We want everybody to know they're going to get caught. We can catch a license plate with all of the existing cameras that we have. Now we have 67 of those. We have a network of thousands of cameras in the region. Our policing efforts are very impressive, and these real-time crime, real-time
Information
center
The Arctic
is a bank of cameras. In fact, if you'd ever like to take a look at it, we can make an appointment with the police department to go look at it. But we have a bank of, just like on television, you have a bank of TVs, and these cameras will ping us, and we can either watch them ourselves or get a call in, zero in on someone. We have cameras that zoom in. We tie them to the license plate readers, and we follow people and we catch them. So it's just fantastic. It's just deploying now in the current year, and it follows the drone investment that was made in the prior year.
Yeah, we plan to increase the drone investment as well. Second location.
Next slide. This is a look at violent crime. There was definitely a reason that in 2015, this community got organized, right? We said enough was enough. We're going to take action. You took action. And by 17, the dollars started flowing. And this is an important one, right? This is violent crime. And we've seen those numbers come down. It didn't take as long to dip below the state average. By 2019, we dipped below the state average on violent crime. We're still below that state average. It's moved around a little bit. And we are trending down again in 2023. And again, our focus is on getting that number below national averages. We're not going to be satisfied when we do. We want to keep moving that number lower. Any questions or feedback?
What year was it that the change in status for a lot of the crimes went from felonies to misdemeanors? Prop 47?
I believe that was 2014, I believe, and then that's where you see the spike actually go from 2014 to 2015.
That's where I was wondering if that's where it hit.
Just real quick, if you didn't know, there's a ballot coming out. We have plenty of signatures, and it'll be out in November, and hopefully it starts getting out. We'll put some stuff out as well. But they're trying to rescind a lot of those things from that Prop 47 and bring it back so we have more power to the police departments to place people on arrest for all these thefts and stuff occurrence.
My observation is, the newcomer is that the investment made with Measure U is paying dividends for the community, and we see it when we look at the community from a long-term perspective. And I think we're gonna look back on 2023 and 2024 and 2025 positively when we see not only the city's investments, but the extra efforts that we've been successful at pulling down some additional resources. Next slide is we want to talk to you and show you what the Measure U dollars are actually purchasing in terms of people. So we have here in column one, and it's easier to look at your handout than the slide
Yeah,
here.
right.
It's tiny, to fit it all in.
Let's suppress the zeros in the future.
But Measure U is funding 42.67. I think finance is taking this 2/3, 1/3 seriously, right? 42.67 people in the police department. Meanwhile, we have 93 staff that are funded by the general fund and 13 that are non-general fund. And the chief and finance are here to answer any questions you have on the allocation.
Well, how many of those are what the thing says is uniformed or officers to get the 1.2? How close are we?
We would need, how many, was that 18
it's 18.
positions? 18 positions. So we have 23 funded by Measure U today. We would need an extra 18. We have 37 in the general fund. Are the two non-general, is that school resource officers?
It is actually, CFD and then, ARPA funded cadets and maintenance workers.
The TBT is temporary part-time. That's what that stands for.
I don't see the mental health crew. Did I miss it?
They're not on our payroll.
So is the clinician not on our payroll, the police officer attached to the clinician is, they're just gonna be in this warrant.
Again,
We're 18 short.
I'm sorry,
Is that, did I hear 18 short? Of the
18 short
1.2?
of the 1.2.
Okay.
We'll show you.
I know a few of us that have been through this before, have been told how hard it is to find enough people to even apply. I don't know if everybody that's new to the committee understands that. When I first started, there was over 100 people that applied for 10 positions up in Humboldt. Now, they're lucky if they get 6. 3 of them show up for testing. Isn't this about right?
It's about,
Shows up for an interview.
it's about right. The quality is not the same as it used to be. So I'll just throw out a number. If we have 100 applicants, we open it up, we have 100 applicants. We're lucky if we get half that number. So it's always half. So 50 show up to the written test. And then we're lucky if we get 25 of those to pass the written and the physical agility test. And then if they make it to backgrounds, that gets really stringent. And if we get 2 out of 100, we're doing really good. 2 solid police officers at 100 would be great.
And then if you hire and they're in the FTO program, what's I hate this term, what's the washout rate? I mean, my old department, I just talked to the head of it, the training, and they're at 62%. They're washing out during training.
I haven't done the math to get the exact percentage, but I can tell you it has gotten worse. And I would attribute that to, when I came into the profession, probably when you came into the profession, it was a career. This is what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I had, my heart was behind it. And now the kids today, they come in, it's like, I'll give it a try. We'll see if it works or not. And if something doesn't go right, they're out. It's not like they're going to stick it out or whatnot. So it's gotten probably, percentage probably higher of dropouts in the field training program.
This is what I, as a retired cop, is constantly getting this question from the citizens here. Why haven't they filled it? Why haven't they filled it? Well, you don't get the quality people to apply, and it's a big problem.
One thing I'd like to say, I don't have the numbers, but I will put them together and I'll get them to you because I think it's really important. I've heard this several times is, You know, I've heard the term boots on the ground. We were told, Measure U, we were gonna have 108 boots on the ground, you know. Why aren't we doing that? I can guarantee you our efforts have been great. And I can tell you the number of people we've hired. It's probably been more than, if you add those number of people we've hired, more than 108. Based on, you know, with these funds, but the attrition. And all the things you just mentioned, you know, we got to think of that. So to 75 seems to be that magic number. As soon as we get above it, we got to 77 and the chief and a lieutenant retired. So back down to 75.
Or a neighboring jurisdiction will be paying more, have better toys, better whistles.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's not getting any better with the Pepra now because now they're tapped out. Something I just thought of the other day, they're tapped out. You know, it doesn't matter how much you make in your career, you're only gonna take home so much at the end of retirement. And so now it's more of what can they get today, you know? Because that's what matters to them. To me, it's like a long career and what I'm gonna make, you know, at the end of my career, because I'm classic still. Not anymore.
Did they lose the 90% max too?
I believe so, yeah. I think they're capped out at a specific number. I don't know what that is, but that's gonna really change things up. And that's the mentality of the younger police officers or anybody in CalPERS in per system is, I gotta work for today and right now.
Yeah.
That makes a difference.
I have a safety question. Are we monitoring dangerous intersections and doing something about it?
Absolutely. I mean, if I would hope people report that specific incidents that make it dangerous and then we case by case.
Do you know what the dangerous intersections in the town are?
I know of one, Buena Vista and Stetson. That seems to be one. Yeah.
Menlo and Gerard.
Yeah.
See, it takes people to tell us though what, and your specific case, you know, what we can do about it. A lot of that is gonna be probably engineering. It's not so much that the police department can fix it, it's gonna be an engineering issue.
Council's well aware of that one. We even already gave them a
Yeah.
map of
Which one was that? Menlo and Gerard?
Menlo and Gerard, where to put the stop signs and et cetera.
So
This city and their Menlo and there's other streets like this. They're 2 lanes, but they're 4 wide. I mean, how many times you get somebody passing you on the left just because they want and they think they got the room? Nuts.
one thing that we didn't talk about in the context of the officer recruitment is we did deploy a $60,000 incentive program this past year. We splashed it quite a bit in LA County and other parts of Riverside County. And we had, I don't know how many dollars available to how many slots we were able to fill, but could you speak briefly on our efforts and how successful those have been?
Yeah, so I just saw it as another tool when it came out. I think I was actually one that approached the chief at the time and told him, hey, let's do this. You know, I had heard Alameda, the city of Alameda was offering a $75,000 bonus. And why not? You're gonna have those, like I just spoke of, the Pepra that want the money right now. So, hey, if I can get a hold of those officers and bring them in because of that, then we've won. And it was $6,000 total. And it was very, very specific because we've learned our lessons and I've learned through reading a lot of other LA, you know, city of LA and whatnot, losing a lot of money. Very specific standards they had to meet. 3 years on the street, they couldn't have a break-in service. So it was essentially so we can get these laterals to come over, hit our field training program in the shortest amount of time and get them boots on the street. And so we had 2 so far. We have had 2 so far and both of them went through the field training program in 2 months time. And they're out there on the streets right now. So they got their $10,000 upfront. And then they'll get their 50,000 lump sum after the 5th year, not until then. So they have to give us 5 years. If they leave before that, then you know, they're out that money. And even if they get injured or they get sick and they take some time off, because we've had people off for like a year, anything over 15 days, that any additional time off after the 15 days gets tacked on to the end of that 5th year. So it extends. They have to give us their time in service.
There's an advantage to bringing the laterals over because we avoid all that startup time and the mentorship that comes with the field training program and
Academy.
The academy. So we also feel like we've lost some officers to some of our nearby agencies that trained up in Hemet, took their skills and talent to a nearby agency. And we have a missing middle, if you will, and this program is intended to help us. But I think we expected a little more interest. in the program, and we would like to see a few more than two take advantage of that.
I think up in the Bay Area, there's a department or two that are also partnering with developers. And the city and the developer go together on like a sixplex where the rent is very low. So you have a lot of these single officers coming in. I mean, try and rent around here. And if you haven't been in the working place and had your first last deposit, it's really tough. And that's been a hiring thing. I think it's not Alameda, but it's close to there. I think it's they could stay in there for up to 2 years. And then it's a contract after that. It's a much lower rental rate than what the going rate is. And you get these people that live here in town.
Yeah, LAPD just started that because they're hurting so bad that they started doing a housing incentive and paying the rent, a certain amount of $1,000 per month for rent while they're going through the academy.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to try every, anything they can to hire. It's not just us, it's everybody that's having these issues across the nation at this point.
And the last comment I'd make is we have to insist and maintain high standards for our officers because there are liability issues associated with it. If we don't have those high standards, and we're going to continue and we commit to continuing exercising high standards when we review our staff and potential staff.
Absolutely. And I'll add one more thing to that because you just reminded me. So, and with the 60,000, we've had a lot of interest actually from laterals. And because of those standards we're maintaining, I've told the guys and girls, I will not drop our standards, just to get bodies, on board for all the reasons mentioned here. And we've had a lot of laterals interested. And then when we get them on board and we start talking to them, you see all the red flags come up, I'm on discipline leave right now. That all comes out. It's like, okay, we don't want anything to do with that. We're done. So a lot of interest from laterals, but not the right ones, the ones we want here.
Next slide is to take a look at some of the investments that have been made over the years. We're looking at 2020 through 2024. There's a second page here. Chief, I'll invite you to mention anything maybe in the 22, 23 and beyond range you want to point out. We've had a lot of technology investments as well.
Here.
And if we have any questions from members of the committee for the chief, feel free.
So real quick, I'll talk on the Rocks team, which is now going to be known as Arrow. They were combined with the Traffic Bureau, I'd say about 2 years ago. And we recently split them up when I had the opportunity, became chief, and we had a sergeant return back to us from Idaho, left us, went there for 4 months and came back. So that afforded me the opportunity to split the two. So we currently have 5 days a week coverage, but we're working on that. I'm actually offering some overtime to get kind of our Friday and weekends covered as well. We've purchased a lot. The most we've purchased. PIUs are going to be our police interceptor units, police cars, black and whites. And the council has approved a lot of those. Our fleet was, we were driving, we were 2007s with over 200,000 miles on them, the Crown Victorias. So we've been able to actually get rid of those and surplus a lot of those. Much needed. Condor cameras, we continue to add, that's just 8 more flock condor cameras in addition to what we already have. Drone first responder program. I'm not sure if you guys are well aware of that, but we have a lot of drones in the department. We have trunk drones. We have drones we can deploy inside of a house. They're all different types of drones, sizes. But this is essentially the biggest one, the Matrice. We have 2 of those, and they launch from the Hemet Hospital at this point. And we have someone up there, and we have a pilot actually inside the real-time information center that's flying it. So they'll launch it from the hospital when we get a call for service. A pilot will take over in the station. He'll fly it to the call for service. So the average response time is about 3 minutes with that. They'll get eyes on the scene. They can already start putting out information to the officers that are on their way out there, trying to get through traffic. So it's been, I think we've had over 1,800 deployments this last year. Lights, they actually have to be Part A or what is called flight license, actually flight license. Range facility, this is a great benefit that the department has that a lot of departments do not have unless you're like the sheriff's department. We have our own range. It's small, but it's great to have your own range. It saves on overtime and cost. In the end, we're not renting out a range from, say, Paula, the range or the Rainbow Range. There's a couple in Corona, all the other agencies that have to go rent out or they come and ask to borrow ours. We did some revitalization there. We laid out concrete. We put an awning out there with some fans underneath. It gets up to 115, we don't stop training, so we're out there. So it's great things. I mean, it's just making us, and those are the types of things we don't think of when a lateral comes and they see or they hear about those things, that's going to draw them to our department as well. Things such as that. We have a Lenco armored vehicle ordered. That's already been ordered. That's your armored vehicle. We have one that we received in 2008. That's the only one we have. We got that through Department of Homeland Security funds, I believe, at that time. So we're excited to get this thing. It's been put back on the calendar a little bit just because of what's going on in Ukraine. I guess they put all their efforts into sending armor over there, but that is still on order in the process. And then obviously the homeless outreach team through CityNet. I will touch on what I see the benefits. I used to run our quality of life team, the ROCKS team, a few years back. And so one of the issues I would always run into is when we run into somebody that actually needs the assistance and the help, it was myself, Lieutenant Dixon at that time, and the officers personally, we had shut everything down because now we're trying to get this person off the streets. And whether that was going to the faith-based community and getting funds or going to Menlo and State.
Valley Restart.
Valley Restart, and we're essentially walking to everybody and saying, we've got a place for this person to go, or we found their family in another state. They're willing to take them, but we need to get them a driver's, an ID card. We need to get them, that was us doing that. Now, the benefit with CityNet, they take care of that. So that lets our officers go back out on the streets and continue doing what they're doing. So that's a huge factor that, benefit. I wish I had CityNet when I was running the team at the time, but let's see. Real-time information center, please let me know if you'd like. We can set up a date to take you because I like to brag about it. You guys will see a video I just approved today that'll be coming out talking about the real-time information center, talking about those live mobile cameras and the fact that this city is not going to just write a citation for those thefts that you guys are and send you on your way. You're going to go to jail. You'll hold that exact line. You're going to go to jail. You will pay your time, whether it's 10 hours, 5 hours. We're just trying to send the message that it's not going to be tolerated here. And there's so much more with this organized retail theft team that we put together, that what they're trying to put together. Big meeting on May 20th. I won't be here, but with a lot of the retail centers here in the city. And they're going to work together on finding these habitual offenders. And so if you have one case, based on what the state has said, it's only a misdemeanor, but now they're going to take, hey, he or she stole these items from Famous Footwear yesterday. Today it went to Target. It's the same person. They have all that information. They're gonna put it all together, search warrants. They've already, I think they've done 2 search warrants on homes for these people, but it's instead of one misdemeanor case, they're gonna combine them all and make it a felony case. So it sticks and they do some jail time. So that is just in the infancy right now at this point.
I've gotten really good feedback from a couple of business owners who have just recently had a couple of people come in and say, okay, this is who we are, this is what's out, what can we do for you?
I think they've been going out on foot and they've hit about 50 retail, stores at this point. Trying to get them and invite them on May 20th to come to this meeting so we can all work collaboratively in the valley. And we're doing an upgrade to the PD administration facility. If you have ever been upstairs on the 2nd story, you'll see that if you walk into the restroom, I think you get a flashbacks to the 70s, maybe the 80s when you walk in there. So some of the walls, we have some water intrusion coming in. So there'll be some facility upgrades happening there. I'm excited for that. Fire Station 1 parking lot rehab, same thing. That we call that our north lot, and that needs a lot of love, and that should be happening here soon. And then very exciting, the PD substation that's on the west end over by Golden Village and the laundromat there and that shopping center. I think we're ordering the computers today, but that thing, 2 months, we should have that open. We're going to have a big ribbon cutting for that and whatnot.
Okay.
It's actually going to house our community services sergeant full-time there. So you'll have an officer there with some of his, you'll have the mental health team housed out of there. And a couple of workstations so that we can keep our officers on that end of town and not have to come back to the station to work on the computers. So that's what we're working on currently.
Do you guys plan to have another citizen academy?
Absolutely. We just graduated
I didn't know.
2 weeks ago.
That's awesome.
I think the next one's in October. Do you have your coin with you?
I totally do. You
All right.
wanna challenge me? No, I totally encourage you guys to go to see what they do and how these funds help. So I'm a super advocate for this academy.
Thank you. And that's what it's for, is to become an advocate for the city and the department, because you learn everything about it, right? And you're like, man, I had no idea, that it took all this to run a department and everything they're doing out there. So. Any other questions?
The holding facility attached to main station here.
Mhm.
Where's that come in the budget? Is that part of police? Is that part of general fund? Where is that?
That comes out of the police budget.
Okay,
And it's such a blessing to have that holding facility. Like, as much as we need a new building, somehow we gotta hold on to that, because
Or build around it, right?
build around it, yes, exactly. So just real quick, I'm glad you brought that up. So if I'm working, I'll throw out there, if I'm working Marietta PD and I go to a theft and I'm gonna arrest them, I have to go from Target where I make the theft, the arrest, and go to one of the jails, whatever, if they're gonna go Southwest or Banning or Riverside. So that takes me out of the field for that many hours, however long it takes. That could take several hours. Now, if they need an okay to book because they have an injury or whatnot, now they're going to the hospital to get them cleared, to get them in the jail, one person. We have the holding facility, we make arrests all day, we take them to our station and we can actually hold them up to 24 hours. So when we get the beds filled, then we have our community service officers, they will do a transport of everybody at one time. So essentially, we're making the arrests on the field, transporting back to the station, doing the booking paperwork, and then we're back out, out in the street. And not spending all those hours, going back and forth on transports.
I don't think a lot of people even know we had it.
Yeah, no, probably not.
Only the visitors, right?
And we have to go through the full inspections that a jail, facility has to, so it's a pain, but it's worth it, every year.
That's great. We don't have drones that suppress fires yet, but maybe that's coming in the future. But we're gonna turn to the fire department real quick. I don't think they've negotiated the fire suppression drone yet with the police department. I've been sharing this chart because it's important for us to know we're a growing community. We're at about 90,000 people today. We've seen a steady increase in call volume. And this is just an illustration of what that looks like. Let's take a look at the next page, which is our call volume by station. Mark's little story is when you're in a station with 1,000 calls, that's a nice station to work in. It's about 3 per day, 2,000, 6 calls per day. Probably pretty average by 3,000. We want to be planning our next station. 4,000, we want to be building our next station. So when you have that context and we see that Station 1 downtown, almost 6,000 calls last year. This is the station that has a squad attached to it. It's a pickup truck with 2 people. Are they both paramedics, chief, or one at least?
One at least,
One at least.
but right now we do have 2.
So the good news is we have
Paramedics.
paramedics on every shift at every station, which is a high level of service. But Station 1 is very, very busy. So when I mentioned turning off the squad for 4 weeks, I did a ride along one night and I was up all night. And I had a brain that wasn't working very well the next day. That may be the day George called me. I was really tired. I think those guys were on day 2 of a 48-hour shift. But incredibly high call volume. Station 2, which is out on Stetson, about 4,000. So that's a station that has room for an expansion. We can add a squad by building to the west of that building onto the park area. Station 3, which is out at Coston and Devonshire. Not the world's fanciest station, right? You can see through this building. The asset needs investment or replacement, but over 4,600 calls, almost 4,700 calls for service last year. This is also a station that's responding to very long distances, right? If it's getting a call at Four Seasons or Stony Mountain, those are really long runs. And if it's the wrong time of day and there's a lot of traffic, and hypothetically with that call volume, if we have 2 calls for service in those 2 locations at the same time, that means we're drawing upon maybe station 1 or station 4 to fill that gap. And it may result in delays. So what our operation today is experiencing is a slower response time than we want. And it's demanding a need to invest in assets and personnel to grow the system in order to reduce the response time, because it's a little slower. I think it's materially slower than what the standard calls for, because we do want to get there to contain a fire to the room of origin. And we want to get there for medical reasons to address a heart attack and a stroke in time, and other medical things. So station 4 is our newest station out on Sanderson. And station 5 is on the east side of town off of Hemet. Is it Hemet Street?
Yes.
Hemet Street.
So be getting one, to get the development name, up by the,
Sweeney,
where,
McSweeney.
there we go. Is there gonna be one there too?
We're planning stations 6, 7, and 8 right now, and Chief or Deputy Chief, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so we're looking for borrowed property in the area of Dominigoni and State-ish. That would cover the McSweeney and like the city manager said. The chief and I have started putting together a preliminary plan for advancing the development that's going on in the city and how that's going to impact our ability to respond for service. So we are looking for some locations for station 7 and 8 as well. And then we're also looking at investing in computers that would identify strategic locations for stations based off of response times and other factors. So we're kind of putting a preliminary plan together with the experience of our folks, and then we're going to overlay that with the software recommendations as well.
Does this city have a requirement for the large developments have to input some money into a fund for fire?
We do have a development impact fee for projects.
Okay.
And just to add a little bit of additional context, I do want to thank the city manager for just really listening, to what we've had to say relative to the call volume. And my other hat, I'm the president of a trade association, so I deal with peers throughout the state of California, and we are the busiest fire department of our size in California. And so, for example, Marietta is building their fire station 6. They run half our calls. They already have 5 fire stations, the same amount that we do. The city of El Dorado Hills in Northern California, they have 5 fire stations. They run less calls than Squad 1, less than 5,000 calls a year. So if that gives any additional context about how busy our folks are, and it certainly has to be addressed. So I'm grateful for the staff we have right now, and frankly, to be able to actually have a plan in place to identify those locations and actually have a plan to build those future fire stations.
By every metric, there's a couple different ones. We should be at somewhere between a 7.5 and an 8 station. Whether it's response times to the 4 corners of the city, whether it's firefighters per 1,000 population, whether it's call volume as the city manager identified 2,500 calls per station. All of those things indicate that we should be between 7.5 and 8 station department based off of today's numbers.
And the operational cost of a fire station is about $3 million a year today. Is that about right? Okay. So just imagine we need another 6 million on top of that 4 million, 3 million, 4 million for the police officers. We need about 6 million to really be meeting the National Fire Protection Agency standards. We're a city in need of revenue. We're not a city like Palm Springs that has enormous revenue off their hotels. I think they're half the size of Hemet. They're about 50,000, yet their revenue is about 200 million. I think it's north of 200 million. Temecula, full of hotels, generating, revenue. We have 13 hotels in Hemet. They generate $450,000 of revenue a year on a $70 million budget. We're a city that's using only two of the three-legged stool that the state of California gives us to raise money, right? We need to diversify our revenue, more than it is today. So I'm grateful that we have a couple of new hotels in progress that are going to go to construction relatively soon. They'll be the first hotel rooms built in 20 years. But we need to diversify our revenue and we need to grow our revenue. We just don't have we don't have the luxury of a freeway, right? Where a lot of these hotels get stacked up against each other.
Where would Fire Station 7 and 8, where would you be looking for that?
So conceptually, right now, we have Fire Station 6 would be located somewhere around State and Dominigoni, that area. Fire Station 7 would, I don't know if Chief Webb, if you have your map, we can pull something up, but we would talk about relocating Station 3 where it exists now. It's actually, no, the building was never meant to actually be a fire station. So we would actually move that location to the west. And so now we're gonna have better response times into Four Seasons and into that side of town. And then Fire Station 8 would be more in the southwest part of town. Is that correct, Chief Webb, based on? Kind of, yeah. So that's kind of what we're looking at doing. And to committee member Clark's comment on dip fees, I did want to also give our members kudos. So our fire prevention program was largely dormant for 10 years here in the city. And so I'm incredibly proud of our workforce. They might not exactly be too happy with us because I just told you guys how busy they are, right? Now our engine companies are actually going out and they're conducting fire business inspections. And that is, not only is that making the community safer, but it's also identifying other areas. For example, we're identifying business licenses that are expired or non-existent. And now we're able to refer those business owners to the right, people at City Hall. And so that proactive approach is going to make for a safer community. Which is, I just wanted to acknowledge that as well. We've come a long way. And so now every school in Hemet has been inspected, every apartment complex, the hotels, and now we're working on all the businesses, and that's all happened in the last couple of years.
Okay, next slide. This is a look at our average response time. What I want to point out is the distinction between everything before 2017 and everything from 2018 forward. You saw a significant drop in the response time, and that's because Measure U arrived, it generated revenue, and we were able to open the Station 5. Is that right? And Station 5 took some pressure off the system. And think about those moments where you have a really busy station, you have so many calls going, it's the overlap of the calls that really make these response numbers go up. And so simply by adding a station, even if it only does 1,300 calls or 1,200 calls a year for service, it takes a lot of pressure off the system. But there are other investments that we're making with Measure U dollars. I believe the two engines that are on order are those Measure U.
Yes.
So we have two engines, they're going to be delivered in November. The engines that they're going to replace take about a minute to warm up, those air brakes. These new engines, we don't have to wait a minute. Just the replacement of the engines is going to help improve our response time. But you can see here that we're starting to trend up. We've been trending up since 2018 and holding the line, but this is a system that needs attention. And when we look at the overall budget, our revenue production has been very good. I think the original estimates on this tax, it was a temporary tax, was everyone would be happy if we hit $10 million. Or we're at 16 million now. And last year's budget was 16.8. It went up a little bit this current year. 16.8 was a lot more than the prior year. We brought it down to the mid-15s. Looks like it's performing a little bit better now. Interest rates are affecting car sales. Car sales are our number one revenue source for the city of Hemet. Interest rates are affecting home sales. We'll feel a little bit of that, but retail sales taxes is our largest.
Could you explain that difference line?
The difference on, okay, so if you look at the overall average above, and you subtract this 6 minutes and 30 seconds, that's the desired response time.
That's the National Fire Protection Association. That's a national average. That is what you see in the red, sir.
So the red is the national average, natural desired response time. Ours is actually 8 minutes and 27 seconds last year. And we have a gap of 1 minute and 57 seconds on average. We want to close that gap.
Okay.
That means that there's a higher probability that a fire is going to move from the room of origin to the entire structure. And sometimes agencies have to choose the level of service that they can afford, right? So some cities probably can't afford a suppression service that can get to the room of origin. We want to be that agency. But there are going to be calls where we can't get there within 8 minutes, and there's gonna be a consequence for that.
The other thing about 8 minutes is clinical death versus biological death. So remember, every fire engine in town has a paramedic on it. So obviously, the more paramedics and the more capacity we have, that saves lives as well.
Okay, I just couldn't see where it was coming from.
Sure.
Our, chief, with the new trucks coming in
Mhm.
and that, is that gonna make our, I don't know what the term is right, our insurance rating?
You're referring to the ISO rating.
Okay,
So that's a great question. Chief Webb and I have been working on that really hard. We're very, very close to improving our rating. We're currently on ISO 4 and we're right on the verge of getting to an ISO 3. So I think with with the city manager and staff's help and the council has been supportive as well. There's some things that we were able to do at the training center and some other things that we're going to be able to do that are going to get us a lot closer as far as our training and some of those investments we're making. So we're pretty close to getting to ISO class 3.
if we can go down to a 3, that affects our property
It
owners.
does, yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many people here own their home and have had to, I had a 28 question thing that came from my insurance just to renew this year. So, I mean, it's getting tough.
Mhm.
Everyone, when we announce that we move from a 4 to a 3, we're gonna let the community know, and everyone should consider taking the risk of talking to your insurance agent.
And we'll have a, what do we call it? Push-in
Absolutely,
Yes.
party?
yeah, absolutely.
The next slide is a look at the number of fire staff that are supported by Measure U. From the Measure U resources, the general fund and the non-general fund. We have 72 personnel, 16 of those are supported through Measure U. The general fund supports about 40 of them and 16 for non-general fund. Firefighter leadership is here to answer any questions you have.
There's no fire chief on this list, but he's right there.
He's working for free.
Yeah, no comment.
He's not a strong negotiator.
Where's the fire marshal come in on this?
So that's another really good question. So again, prior to our new leadership here, we did not have really the fire chief by default, legally is the fire marshal for any municipality. But in terms of an actual fire marshal position, that was not in place here. So we first created the vision of what a fire prevention bureau should look like. And so over the last 3 years, that has grown from a contract, CSG, which was just doing new construction of just basically new homes, to actually hiring our own city fire prevention officers, who again, they're really the reason behind the success that we started having in our really thorough inspection program. Then when we created the Department of Life Safety in 2022, we had the opportunity to now have a hybrid of a chief building official / deputy fire marshal. And so to answer your question, sir, that's where that official position comes in, and we're actually going through a hiring process right now. So we don't have anything to announce yet, but we're going to have a very professional person in place shortly.
Great.
does the city have an emergency plan for earthquake and fire? In writing,
We do, and it's currently being updated as we speak. I'll let Chief Webb talk about that, and our new emergency services coordinator. That's one of her biggest things that she's actually working on, is our emergency operation plan and also our emergency operations center.
when will that be finished?
We are hoping to have it done within the first quarter of fiscal year 24, so hopefully by December. Yeah, we have, the current plan was last revised in 2013. So they're on a 10-year or so timeframe, so we're a little behind on the emergency operation plan, but not substantially. So we're hoping to be concluded by the end of the year.
One of the things that I thought was sorely lacking in the Fairview fire, we have no 24-hour pharmacies here. We gotta have a 24-hour pharmacy during an emergency.
Good point.
That's a really good point. I don't want to get too excited about, vision, but we do have some vision about some other community enhancements down the road that are going to take technology into play and working with some local partners. And that is a very important point, though.
Yeah, and I would love to participate in that.
Thank you.
Question, I remember last time we met, there was a fire engine that was, that you guys were gonna get, and it came from Measure U funds at first. And then COVID happened, then they sent those funds to the general funds, and then things got hazy, and now they said you guys wanted the fire engine from Measure U funds. So did that ever get resolved? Is it coming from general or Measure U?
I probably have a different recollection of the way that's being described right now, but they were always under Measure U. We've had a delay with our vendor, so the two fire engines that are actually coming in November, they were actually supposed to come last calendar year. And because of challenges with vendors, everybody blames COVID for everything, frankly, right? But there's a lot of challenges with manufacturers, and we're not the only fire department that's experiencing this. So those were pushed back to this calendar year. In fact, originally we were supposed to have them by now.
Yeah.
Then that was pushed again to November. So those are going to be on Measure U.
And is Station 1's engine relatively new, and that's a Measure U funded
Yes,
engine?
yes.
And when you ride in an engine like that, it's just a different ride for the staff as well.
It's cheap, and she might be referring to the money that came out of the vehicle replacement fund that went to the general fund and then now is back.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Got it.
Okay, and so that was a great, frankly, with our current, with Tiffany in finance and city manager Prestwich, that was restored. So that's a good thing.
So we restored that in the current year budget, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Can you remember what the number was?
It was,
683.
yeah.
683,000. Yeah, so we did add that back in the current year budget.
And then it was police and fire both had a portion of it, so we did.
Do I have the numbers right? You've got a $60 million surplus in the general fund, $20 million in the Measure U. You added $10 million additional funds for the last fiscal year.
The 62 million is all inclusive of everything.
Yes. General.
So all of the entire total is 62. Now this current year,
Including Measure U?
including Measure U.
Okay.
Now this year, because the numbers were so high, a couple things happened. When we adopted the budget last year, the council raised the general fund minimum reserve policy from 20% to 40%. There's still a delta of non-Measure U, correct me if I'm wrong, a delta of about $14 million. It's going to shrink a little bit for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about that. But there was a delta of about $14 million north of the minimum 40% on the general fund side, just on the general fund. We're not applying the 40% to Measure U. It's still a 20%. But this is for the 40%. So whatever the 40% of the general fund was, that we had $14 million on top of that. Rather than let money erode due to inflation and knowing the needs of the community, particularly paving in particular, We are $50 million behind on paving. $50 million
Behind on what?
behind on paving, just to bring our streets to a
50,
standard.
I paid it, okay.
We can talk about paving all day long. I know it's really unrelated to Measure U right now, but our roads have the potential to erase our surpluses and eat us alive if we don't get ahead of these streets, because they become exponentially more expensive as we let them erode. We actually have to take care of the ones that are better now, because it's 115 a mile, not 500 a mile, 500,000 a mile for an overlay, or 1 million plus for a rebuild. We have to be the city that's over in the 115. And we have 260 miles of streets. 1/3 of those 37% of those streets are about to move from grind and overlay to a full rebuild. So we have this ticking time bomb where we have to get ahead of this, which is one of the reasons that we're actively advancing paving. We're actively, aggressively going after grants. This year, we've been spending about $3.5 million on road maintenance based on various revenue sources. We continued that investment, but this year we grew it by $3 million. $1 million for the auto mall, $2 million for local streets. The auto mall had not been repaved. In fact, it has potholes. We're trying to, the city's largest revenue source is selling cars. We can't sell cars with potholes in our auto mall. So we're about to go to bid. We have to reject bids on Tuesday and rebid it. But we'll be rebidding that and paving the auto mall. We also received an extra $1.7 million this year from Supervisor Gutierrez. That's going to pave Kirby from Esplanade to Florida. And we're aggressively going after other asks right now. But I say that because it's important for our overall financial health to keep an eye on our road repair and make sure that those investments are maintained. And we're gonna have to probably talk about a more aggressive effort to make sure that we capture these streets before they become more expensive.
And Tuesday, you're formalizing the 5-year plan also?
It's a 5-year plan for Measure A, right? And so we don't have specific streets outlined there.
Yeah.
But it's required that we do this.
Okay.
We're gonna, and we have, by the way, we have $5 million of paving that's going out at mid-year. We're catching up on some projects from prior years and that extra 2 million. 5 million middle of the year, another 1.7 at the end of the year. There'll be a lot of, and Caltrans is doing Florida sometime before November. If they don't make it before the rain, it'll be in the spring.
One corner at a time?
Mark, just really quick, you said that we need to generate revenue.
Right.
Is there a plan in place to like contact businesses to come here or turn this into Coachella? Like, what's the plan?
Yeah, so we have hired, a couple months ago, we hired our economic development manager, first person in about 7 years. Again, it's one of those, one of the opportunities that came from seeing the surplus. We were able to invest in certain strategic focuses. So with that person, we're taking a contingent to Las Vegas later this month to seek additional retail investment. But we do have a number of companies that are knocking on our door today, unlike prior years. I'm sure we've had investment over the years, but we're seeing fairly significant investments, like a significant warehouse, 875,000 square feet, 500 jobs, a relocation of a corporate headquarters.
No more restaurants, right? Fast food.
I think we all want a Chick-fil-A.
We do. I think that
I think we want a second In-N-Out burger, so,
Okay.
but I hear you.
With Chris.
Maybe, yes.
I think the chief has a connection over here. But
Okay.
yeah, we have an economic strategy that's in draft right now. And that draft strategy will have about 20 different initiatives that will be revenue strategies. We've already deployed some, like the hotel investment program is intended to clean up the town and help us. By the way, I didn't mention, we had 1,500 calls for service at those hotels that generate $50,000 a year. So that's about a net zero in terms of what they're contributing to the overall economic health. And arguably many of them are affecting our reputation from a hospitality perspective. We have to encourage an investment. out of our hotels.
If that bed's paid by the county, you don't get a bed tax, right?
We do, I believe,
No,
we
we
don't on
don't.
that one, no?
Not on room vouchers,
Okay.
no.
So we have an active conversation with the county about these vouchers as well. There is a transitional housing facility that will be announced sometime this fiscal year. They're working on site selection right now. We're gonna hear relatively soon about that. So there's some interesting news on that front. We're hoping to move out of the voucher business, at least for the 10 vouchers that we have, and move them to this other facility. And our dollars would be supporting the operations of this transitional housing facility, which is a better environment than a distressed hotel.
Then you have a possibility, I mean, I hate the idea of it. 5 dispensaries if everything gets passed.
The council will be considering a change in the ordinance on Tuesday related to that topic.
And I know it brings in a lot of money to cities and counties. Brings in a lot worse things too. But that's just the old cop in me. That lived in Humboldt County.
So just a quick peek at some fire-related projects and technology upgrades. I'll invite the chief up to 30 seconds. Anything he would like to highlight?
That's why he gets paid the big bucks.
Zero.
Bureau and negotiator. No, so you can see that the things that are in bold are the things that maybe some of you aren't aware of. So that's the personal protective equipment, storage lockers, the 14-line turnout codes. So that's the actual structural firefighting equipment that our firefighters are wearing, which is really good. Our Fire Station 2 and Fire Station 5 fence projects, I want to commend Chief Webb on making sure that those projects were done along with our public works and contract folks. And it's a big deal. You know, these investments that we're doing are truly appreciated by our employees, and we need to continue to do that. And it makes obviously our stations that much better. And you know, just in terms of any sort of security issues as well. You know, we live in those times when folks want to break into, you know, government facilities, and firefighters live in those fire stations, right? That's their home. So, and then also the Covell building security upgrade. And we have some other things that are going to be in the works as well with Measure U. And I think that this last page talks about it. So partnering with PD to replace batteries from the radio repeater sites. And then we have something that we'll just kind of hint at, that we have a great opportunity to get a new ladder truck, a tiller ladder truck. Our existing ladder truck is 17 years old. And right now, I told you about the challenges with the vendors and the manufacturers. So if we were to order a new ladder truck right now, the average is 3 to 4 years to actually see it. And a lot of money, and well in excess of over $2 million. So we have an opportunity that's going to go to council actually on Tuesday to actually get a ladder truck that'll be fantastic to serve the community for a long time. The ladder trucks have about a life of 20 years. And so then that would then put the current ladder truck into a reserve status, which we currently do not have a reserve ladder truck. So there's some big things coming.
Just something that we were getting on our ISO rating.
Yes.
Quick question on the turnouts. Are our firefighters, do they have 2 complete sets now?
They do, yes.
Great. I don't know if everybody understands that. As I understand that toxicity can go into one fire, not having a chance to clean off their turnouts.
Right.
And having to put it on again is a big factor.
Yeah. Well, much like, you know, your law enforcement days, and I think when the chief started in PD, we used to do a lot of things that were kind of a badge of honor, right? I mean, I remember it was cool to not clean your helmet and to have your helmet just with soot and black, and I mean, that was cool. And if somebody came and did a streak, you wanted to kill that person, you know? And now, right, it's the opposite. So the culture is changing to where we realize that we're more susceptible to cancer than the general population. And so we want to make sure that, you know, our firefighters are, you know, they're obviously exposed to carcinogens and danger, but anytime that we can reduce risk, that's what we want to do.
So, to close out sort of the first two, we did some background on Measure U. So we talked about the audit figures from fiscal year 2023. That's the year of focus for reviewing expenditures. These expenditures are on the Measure U website. So we want you to take a careful look at those. The topics we've talked about today are all fair game for, comments that you will include at a later date for a transmittal. The homework for the committee is really, it's the action about present to answer these questions that are in the recommendation. These are questions that you're going to answer at your second meeting. These are the prompts for you as you look at the landscape over the next 4 weeks or so. But we have a lot of source data for you on the website. We are available to make appointments to speak with you about specific questions. We want to encourage you to note the issues that you were concerned about today, log of those, share those with the council, what we will be coming back to you with, and we'll try to get you the data to you as quickly as we can. It's very dynamic, so we probably will still have some placeholders in certain locations, but we have a draft budget. It's being refined. It's a dynamic budget because we're actively talking with our bargaining groups. But we will have a budget presentation at the council on Tuesday. That meeting begins at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
4 p.m. So we'll spend about an hour to an hour and a half, kind of high level on what's happening with the budget. There are some issues and trends, and get some feedback on our assumptions. We're essentially using the same firm that has a highly recognized for their expertise in forecasting revenues. We're using HDL to forecast property tax and sales tax revenues. We're not choosing to grow those. We're not diluting those. So those will be the numbers that drive the revenues. But we'll share that with you as soon as we can in advance of the next meeting, and we'll be needing to work with the city clerk to check calendars. I also want to let you know that the city council has asked for a meeting to learn more about the audit process and the distinction between the general tax, the general taxes, special tax, and understand the context of what an audit is and what those requirements are. We've talked to our auditor about this. The auditor is working with us, and we'll be working with the council to identify a date. But I anticipate that this could be a good opportunity for a joint meeting of the Measure U committee and the city council. So we'll be checking your calendars as well. I think it's probably safe to say it may be at least 4 weeks out because we have a lot of other challenges on our hand operationally to get through with the budget between now and then. But it'll be helpful information to talk about how we might want to consider additional focus on Measure U type expenditures and to hear some of the concerns that we've all heard over the last 7 years.
Will that address, in the past, we've had an audit that was citywide, and then we've had, I'll put in quotations because it's not an actual audit, whatever, of a Measure U. That wasn't done. I agreed on procedure. That wasn't done this year. I don't know why, or if that's something that's gonna be looked at.
That's exactly the type of topic that we're gonna get into the weeds on. We want everyone to be part of that conversation. The auditors won't call it they won't call it an audit. They will call it agreed upon procedures. It's just a term of art that is used, and they literally cannot call it an audit. It has to be that term, but we can talk about what those agreed upon procedures ought to look like, and we can call that report whatever we want at the end of the day if we want it to look somewhat different. But that's exactly the intent. The council the council has directed us to schedule some time to have basically a audit 101 type of discussion on that topic.
I think a lot of the citizens are missing that.
A couple of times you've mentioned that we should put together majority and minority reports. How can we do that with the Brown Act?
Well, I think as you deliberate and you talk, I think what would be helpful is if you have a member who has a different perspective on certain topics, You may want them to be part of a working group of up to three
Mhm.
members of the committee that could get together between the point in time where you've had the conversation about what you think the feedback and the framework would look like. This is where I anticipate potentially a third meeting, where we have that second meeting, there's some feedback, you may want to come together with, send your writing team off to caucus, draft up a letter that the full committee reviews, submit it to the city council, we'll transmit that, they'll receive, we need them to receive that before they make a decision on the budget and consider your feedback. So we will want to work with you swiftly to do that while we were fortunate to be 3 weeks ahead of last year. We don't have a lot of time. So we recognize we need to work pretty quickly.
On the website where it has the line items, there's two for each. One's a PDF file. And I could let CI or something like that is the other file.
One of them is all the line items like
Yeah.
detailed out in
Yeah.
like a
the
bajillion
PDF.
pages, and then the other one is just like a recap.
That's what the second one, I didn't have time to
We
get in.
have them separated. There's the revenue piece,
Okay,
and they're all the way down at the bottom of the Measure U Oversight Committee site.
Yeah.
It's the revenue first and then the expenditures second, and we do split them between police and fire. There's two
Yeah.
columns there. And then below is the comparison where you can see the over the year progression of what's occurred.
if we're doing our homework and going through and taking a look at some of the line items things, and we have a question on it,
Yes.
are we best to shoot you an email?
Yeah, I'm gonna send you out the ratios. And when I do that, you'll have my contact information, and at any time, don't hesitate to reach out and ask any kind of questions.
Okay,
And like Mark said, if you guys wanted to come by and sit with us for anything, we're more than happy.
okay, yeah, I very quickly, I mean, I only think I got through the first 75 pages of the police department's almost 400 for this past. And I had some questions, but it was like a line item might have 3 or 4 letters and a couple numbers, but it doesn't tell me what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of that would be like, it has a vendor number and the vendor name. In the beginning, it's sectioned out where you're gonna hit your salary and benefits first.
Mhm.
And that's a lot of coding,
Mhm.
just for internal purposes, we know what's happening.
Mhm.
And then you have your maintenance and operations, which is the meat of everything that most people are looking at. And then you have your internal service funds, which are just journal entries, and that's probably what you're seeing.
Okay,
And then the capital improvement is the final piece.
okay,
And that's where the large item purchases are made.
all right. I won't bore everybody here. I'll send you a couple of,
Okay,
what the
sure.
heck is this?
I'm gonna close with just this slide here on enhanced transparency. We didn't have all those transactions on the website when you met last year. We do now. We hope it's helpful to you, and we hope it's helpful to the community to know that we share all of those with you. And additionally, we're now bringing every budget transfer that's approved at the staff level to the city council about every month. And so that's something that you'll see recurring on our city council agenda. I think we have one again next Tuesday, right, on that one. So those are 2 changes that we've made in the last 12 months. And we're happy to answer any additional questions you have today.
In our next meeting, I noticed that there wasn't a minutes to be approved from our last meeting, and I went online, I couldn't find any minutes online neither. We'll do 2 like we've done sometimes in the past.
Minutes will be on it.
Okay, so we'll do that one and this one.
That is
Right on, okay.
Are there any days, just quickly, are there any days or times of day that are deal breakers? Is the afternoon better?
Hmm.
And is there a day
Yeah.
day of the week to avoid?
Friday.
Are there any committee members? That have to do with Saturday and Sunday?
Tuesdays and Wednesdays are tough in late afternoon.
Okay.
We only have one vehicle between two of us.
I think Thursday probably works good for us as
Yeah.
well.
Thursdays are good.
And so,
Are good.
I think we'll look at dates then in the next 2 to 3 weeks. If you could start to hold your Thursdays for the next 6 weeks, that would be helpful. And probably from about 3 o'clock on. Does that
I'll
work?
speak to you about my availability.
Okay.
Be very restricted, so.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Do we have to vote on anything or
No,
no motions?
this is the next item on the agenda, which is in committee member stuff.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation. I guess we'll now move on to committee member and staff comments. Any additional comments from the committee or staff?
I'd just like to say thank you. The education was wonderful.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good.
Very informative.
Yeah. Dazzling,
Yes.
confusing,
More from Mark.
mystifying.
Answered a lot of questions too.
Yeah.
Yeah. From place and fire, so I didn't have to ask anything. It's good. Okay.
May I snap a quick picture? I'm just like that. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Let's get a picture, okay.
I'm out there. I'm trying to freeze the moment. And you guys made me feel great. Ooh, all right, thank you.
Okay.
You can have a volunteer to include you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna do a selfie.
No. My forehead comes out extra.
I don't. 1, 2, 3.
All right. Thank you.
JP doesn't know the angle. You gotta go up, down, right?
Up, so I'm like,
Okay, there being no further business, this adjourned to the next Measure U, Citizen Oversight Committee meeting to a date uncertain. Thank you for joining us today.
Awesome.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.